Now, around 4,000 people have marched in Crowborough against the Home Office plans to house up to 540 male asylum seekers at a nearby military camp.
The British countryside hasn't been shattered by war, but by a signature from Westminster. Overnight, ancient parishes have become friction points where tax-paying locals look on as their heritage is sidelined. It is a bitter reality where the safety of new arrivals seems to rank higher than the concerns of those who have tended this land for generations. If you believe that the voices of rural communities deserve to be heard and that British veterans should never be displaced, please take a moment to hit the like button on this video. Your support helps us bring these hidden stories to light. The tension had been building for months, but the spark that ignited the powder keg occurred at exactly 5:36 p.m. The location was the Crowborough Military Base, a site steeped in history and local pride. For generations, this facility had been a training ground for the nation's defenders. On this specific day, it housed 600 young cadets.
These were the sons and daughters of the working class, ordinary young people who had committed themselves to the discipline and service of their country. They were the future of the armed forces. Yet in a move that would soon send shockwaves across the nation, orders were given to clear the barracks. Witnesses watched in disbelief as these 600 cadets were removed from their quarters. They were not leaving for a deployment or a training exercise. They were being evicted. Their beds and their lockers were needed for a different demographic. A fleet of buses arrived shortly after, carrying hundreds of male migrants who had arrived on British shores from Africa and the Middle East. These individuals had no documentation and no vetting, yet they were ushered into the secure facility that had just been emptied of British recruits. The visual contrast was stark and painful. Outside the perimeter fence, elderly veterans who had served their country in previous conflicts were seen sleeping rough on the cold pavement, bundled in rags. While inside the warm, heated barracks, new arrivals with no connection to the land were being settled in. It was at this precise moment that the situation on the ground shifted from confusion to fury. At 5:36 p.m., masked groups began to gather near the entrance. These were not the usual political protesters. These were locals and angry citizens who felt a red line had been crossed. The atmosphere was electric with rage. Then something strange happened. The live broadcast that was documenting this unprecedented replacement of cadets with migrants suddenly cut to black. The official explanation given to the public was a technical fault. It was dismissed as a glitch in the satellite feed. However, information that has since surfaced suggests a much more disturbing reality. This is the first major twist in our investigation. The interruption of the broadcast was likely not an accident. Sources from within the command structure have indicated that the blackout was a deliberate suppression tactic. It was not done to prevent panic among the general public, but to hide a mutiny that was brewing within the ranks of the local law enforcement. It appears that several officers on the ground, when faced with the order to hold back the local villagers and protect the new arrivals, refused to engage. They found themselves morally unable to turn their batons against the very community they had sworn to protect. The blackout was necessary to cover up the arrival of a special tactical unit brought in from outside the district, a unit that had no qualms about enforcing the new directive. This was the moment the countryside realized that the forces of law and order were no longer on their side. The consequences of this decision rippled outwards immediately. It was not just a matter of social cohesion. It was an economic catastrophe. In the world of finance, confidence is everything. When confidence evaporates, value collapses. The moment a village name appeared on the government list of proposed sites for migrant housing, the local economy was effectively sentenced to death. Estate agents who had worked in these districts for decades watched in horror as the property market crashed. The statistics are devastating. Any residential property located within a 5-mile radius of these military bases was immediately classified by the market as a toxic asset. It did not matter if the house was a historic manor or a modest family cottage. The value plummeted by 20 to 40% overnight. Imagine a family that had spent 30 years paying off a mortgage on a home worth £500,000. In the blink of an eye, £200,000 of that wealth vanished. It was not just a paper loss. It was the erasure of retirement plans and the destruction of inheritances. Insurance companies, which are notoriously risk-averse, reacted with brutal speed. Premiums for homes and businesses in the affected zones skyrocketed. Some insurers simply refused to renew policies, citing the increased risk of civil unrest and crime. This left thousands of homeowners vulnerable and trapped. They could not sell because no one wanted to buy, and they could not insure their property against the chaos that was unfolding on their doorsteps. Small business owners faced a plague of theft. Tools, vans, and stock were stolen with alarming frequency. When these owners went to the police, they were met with a wall of bureaucracy. They were advised against filing formal reports. The reasoning was that high crime statistics would further damage the reputation of the area and make insurance even harder to obtain. The victims were told to suffer in silence for the greater good. This leads us to the second major revelation of this crisis. While the local population faced financial ruin, there was a specific group of people who were making a fortune. The government had justified the use of military bases by claiming it was a cost-saving measure. They argued that housing migrants in hotels was too expensive and that barracks would be cheaper for the taxpayer. This claim has turned out to be a complete fabrication. An independent analysis of the spending reveals a disturbing flow of money. The contracts to retrofit these old bases were worth millions. They involved the supply of industrial catering heated tents, high-tech security systems, and private medical teams. Who received these contracts? They did not go to local businesses in the struggling villages. They went to massive outsourcing corporations, many of which have significant ties to political donors in London. The twist here is that the refugee crisis in rural Britain has been transformed into a money laundering operation for tax revenue. Public money is being extracted from the Treasury under the guise of humanitarian aid and funneled directly into the accounts of private contractors. The chaos is profitable. The longer the crisis lasts and the more permanent the camps become, the more money flows to these select companies. The villagers are not just victims of bad policy. They are the collateral damage in a massive wealth transfer scheme where the taxpayer funds their own economic exclusion. Do you think the government is being honest about the true cost of these camps? Please simply type yes or no in the comment section below so we can gauge the public opinion. As the economic reality bit hard, the social fabric began to tear. The concept of justice in Britain has always been based on the idea of equality before the law. However, the events surrounding the military bases introduced the country to the terrifying reality of two-tier justice. This was no longer a theoretical concept discussed by academics.
It was visible on the streets. In the village of Scampton and the surrounding parishes, the police presence was heavy. But the officers were not there to patrol the lanes and catch burglars. They were deployed to form a ring of steel around the bases. Their primary mission was the protection of the facility and its new inhabitants. The local residents who paid the taxes that funded these officers found themselves treated as potential threats. The most egregious example of this disparity occurred when a 70-year-old grandmother was arrested. Her crime was not violence or theft. She had lived in the village for her entire life. She was detained for hate speech after she publicly complained about the noise and the harassment she faced from the new arrivals. Contrast this with the treatment of the migrants inside the bases. Reports of fighting, drug use, and intimidation within the camps were rampant. Yet the police adopted a policy of non-intervention. Crimes committed by the new arrivals were often unrecorded or downplayed to avoid inflaming community tensions. It was a policy of containment rather than enforcement. In South Birmingham, at a location known as Sector 16, police radios crackled with the message that the area was totally lost. The police had effectively ceded control of the streets to the mob, yet they directed their full force against the law-abiding citizens who dared to protest. Violent clashes resulted in over 120 people being hospitalized. The injuries were severe, ranging from broken bones to head trauma. Yet the media coverage was sanitized. The news reports focused on the anger of the far-right protesters while ignoring the provocation and the violence that came from the other side. The police effectively shielded the migrants from public scrutiny while exposing the local population to the full weight of the law. This inversion of justice left the rural communities feeling abandoned. They realized that in the eyes of the state, a grandmother defending her heritage was more dangerous than a young man who had entered the country illegally. The anger was further fueled by the disparity in health care. Rural medical practices are notoriously overstretched. Residents often wait weeks for a routine appointment with a general practitioner. Yet inside the wire of the military bases, the government had established a parallel health system. The migrants were provided with dedicated, on-earth medical teams paid for by the state. They did not have to wait. They did not have to travel. The resources were brought to them. This visual representation of priority was a bitter pill for the locals to swallow. They saw their own access to health care crumbling, while a premium service was rolled out for those who had contributed nothing to the system. This brings us to the third and perhaps most chilling twist of the entire saga.
The government and the media have consistently framed these camps as temporary emergency measures. They argue that once the backlog of asylum claims is processed, the bases will be returned to the military or restored to the community. However, evidence found deep within the planning documents suggest that this is a lie. Construction experts who worked on the retrofitting of the bases have come forward with disturbing details. The specifications for the new structures are not temporary. The foundations being laid are deep concrete designed to last for decades. The sewage and electrical systems are being upgraded to the standards required for a permanent town, not a transient camp. This is not emergency housing. This is the construction of permanent settlements. The leak of these technical documents points to a long-term strategy known as demographic engineering. The placement of these massive camps in deep rural areas is not accidental. These districts have traditionally been the heartlands of conservative voting blocs. They are areas that value tradition, stability, and national sovereignty. By placing thousands of young men from a completely different cultural background into these areas, the government is engaging in a scorched earth policy against its political opponents. The objective is to permanently alter the demographic makeup of the countryside. Within 5 to 10 years, these camps are designed to evolve into established towns. The sheer number of new residents will overwhelm the local voting population. The political map of rural Britain is being redrawn not by the ballot box, but by the bulldozer. The plan is to break the conservative stronghold by importing a new electorate that is dependent on state aid and likely to vote for the party that provides it. The villagers are being forced to watch the construction of their own political obsolescence. The gates built into the perimeter fences face towards the towns, suggesting that integration is the ultimate goal. The government has no intention of deporting these individuals. They are here to stay, and the military bases are simply the incubators for a new society that will replace the old. The psychological toll on the residents is immense. These are communities where people used to leave their back doors unlocked. They knew their neighbors and they trusted the police. That world has vanished. Now high-security lighting floods the country lanes at night. CCTV cameras monitor the village greens. Parents are afraid to let their children play outside. The silence of the countryside has been replaced by the constant hum of generators and the sirens of police vans. The sense of betrayal is absolute. The people feel that the social contract has been torn up. The idea that you pay your taxes and obey the law in exchange for protection and stability has been exposed as a fraud.
The state has turned its resources against its own people. It has prioritized the needs of the stranger over the needs of the citizen. The rural population is not just fighting for their property values or their safety. They are fighting for their identity. They see their heritage being dismantled brick by brick. The historic barracks that once housed the heroes of the Battle of Britain are now off limits to the homeless veterans who served in the Falklands and Afghanistan. The symbolism is impossible to ignore. The past is being erased to make way for a manufactured future. The government is managing the decline of the rural economy and the erasure of rural culture with the cold efficiency of a technocrat. This is not a temporary crisis that will blow over by next Christmas. This is a fundamental restructuring of the nation. The military bases are the physical manifestation of a new ideology that views national borders as obsolete and local heritage as an obstacle to progress. The conflict in these villages is a microcosm of the wider struggle for the soul of the country. As the sun sets over the barbed wire fences of Scampton and Crowborough, the mood is one of grim determination. The villagers know that they are on their own. The police will not help them. The media will not tell their story. The government will not listen to them. They have been designated as the opposition in their own land. But they are not giving up. The protests may have been suppressed, but the anger has not gone away. It has deepened. It has become a cold, hard resolve to resist the erasure of their community. The story of the military bases is a warning. It shows how quickly a free society can be inverted, how easily justice can be weaponized, and how ruthless the state can be when it decides to engineer a new reality. The countryside may be quiet tonight, but it is the silence of a held breath. The storm is not past. It has only just begun. If you want to stay informed about the stories that the mainstream media refuses to cover and support our investigation into these issues, please make sure to subscribe to our channel. Your subscription helps us keep digging for the truth.